I'm going to have similar fun watching various it's kind of winding up and down. I mean, that's the UK.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope we can all take a seat so we can start this auspicious and historic, momentous meeting. I repeat, this is an auspicious start. This is the start of new beginnings. And it is also testing times, as we know. The SDGs, with their large breadth and no one left behind objective, presents a novel challenge. And according to OECD, time is running out. The clock is ticking. And if we do not confront the possibilities, as well as the threat of great change, with collaborative thinking, the clock will keep ticking, and we will not be able to meet the goals of the Sustainable Development Agenda. And the only way it has increasingly become clear that the ways in which we can stop the clock is through unprecedented collaboration and engagement with new actors, including the private sector. And this set of principles is a set of principal standards that were adopted yesterday and will be launched today with all of your participation to make real and to implement and actualize what was started through a historic process of consultation, inclusive engagement, and collaboration 2 years ago by senior level members of the Global Partnership. So today, we herald and mark and celebrate new beginnings. It is the end of one journey and a new journey begins. And this is your responsibility. You will recommit and rededicate all your efforts to implementing and enforcing the Kampala principles. And before I turn to my high-level panel, what I do want to stress is that one of the principles, one of the key principles, number 3, talks of inclusive dialogue and inclusive engagement, which includes the inclusion and engagement of women leaders. Women leaders lead many of our private sector institutions, but we don't often see them as decision makers at the table, creating the policies that shape a new agenda and shape a new future. And that is why it is so important to ensure that the Kampala principles are augmented by those principles of inclusion and engagement by all members who are affected by the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, what I would like to do is to ask His Excellency the Vice Minister, Monova Ahmed, of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh was one of the key members of this high-level consultative global partnership, and Bangladesh itself was one of the important case studies that helped to provide insight into the Kampala principles. So the Vice Minister brings important insights, brings important leadership to the table, and we look forward to hearing from him about the ways in which this study came about.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, distinguished panelists, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizer for organizing on behalf of the GPDC co-chairs for arranging such an important and timely event. We just successfully concluded the GPDC's first special meeting, and the Kampala principles, a new framework has been introduced for ever greater public private sector engagement. We welcome the principles based on 5 fundamental lines aligned with the spirit of development fitness will give you insight to the private sector engagement discourse. The new framework is expected to facilitate greater private sector participation and engagement in the development agenda. As many of you are aware that we have given much focus on private sector financing for attaining the goal of Agenda 2030. According to our estimates, around 928 billion additional financing will be required to achieve SDGs, where private sector will share the larger portion. Private sector at the moment in Bangladesh contributing significantly to some estimates 78% to the investment for maintaining consistent higher growth and reaching to higher trajectory of the world. Madam Moderator, as you have mentioned that about the case study, in our we value the experience as a case study country, where we reviewed about 240 private sector projects. I would like to mention 3 of the main findings. Number 1, only 12% explicitly target the poor or poor living in underserved or rural locations, and only 4% explicitly targeted. It seems that, I'm talking about 240, we have to keep this in mind. It means that there is an opportunity for us, the government and our development partner, to make greater use of private sector engagement efforts to address social challenges. Second, government institutions were only listed as partners in 9% of the projects. 8% of projects involve civil society and only 1% national business associations. So greater participation by local stakeholders in private sector engagement projects, including the government and other non-state actors, who contribute to the creation of more inclusive partnerships and support greater family ownership. This is why I'm particularly pleased to see inclusive partnership listed as the first principle, reflecting on the need to strengthen coordination, alignment, and capacity building at country level. The third and last one is the small and medium-sized enterprises are important beneficiaries of private sector engagement projects in Bangladesh. They account for over 99% of industrial establishments in Bangladesh, providing employment to between 70 to 80% of workers outside the agricultural labor force. Therefore, PSE has strong potential for ever increased development cooperation and partnering among key stakeholders, including multilateral development actors, has lot to do in our belief in this area. We believe strongly in development cooperation among stakeholders, including government and partners, strategically, which we believe can facilitate more private sector engagement through managing their investments. Regular and inclusive dialogues among the key stakeholders, private sector, development partner, and the government are to be held at country level. It is important for building trust and finding appropriate solutions in the local context. I would emphasize on trust building among the key stakeholders, particularly with the private sector partner, is crucial because at the end of the day, they are making their investment decisions. In fact, Bangladesh, as a very strong and vibrant platform to engage private sector with other key stakeholders. For example, we organized a workshop with a partner from the OECD and the UNDP in February 2018 in Dhaka. This inclusive consultation and dialogue led to the development of a national action plan and set of recommendations to address concerns and harness opportunities of the many private, public, and civil society partners in our country. Distinguished participants, we believe a stronger role has been created for the development partners to be more active and visible in the private sector engagement under the Kampala principles framework. These principles will give a new insight to the private sector engagement dialogue and discourse, will contribute more to the national, regional, and global development drive. I believe it will make real sense. I want to close by highlighting again the importance of coordination among the many different partners and alignment of strategies, projects, and programs with national priorities. At the end, what I'd like to say, the we have, after the adoption of this capital principle and the announcement establishment of this principle, the motion is set. Now what is needed is active participation of all stakeholders under the leadership of the country at the country level is very, very important. With these few words, I again, on behalf of the co-chairs, would like to thank the organizers, the participants and panelists for your attendance, and we look forward to the fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The bedrock principle behind the SDGs, achieving the SDGs, is leaving no one behind. But the analysis of the data that the Minister just described to us shows that only 4% of the private sector engagement targets women, which means that there's a gender gap of 96%. That's enormous and quite I would say so. And especially when it is so important for the private sector's bottom line itself. If one looks at this as a business case, of the private sector engagement, to engage with the other 96% of the population in Bangladesh. Because after all, it is estimated that it adds 12 trillion in market opportunities, that engaging holistically and inclusively adds 12 trillion in market opportunities. So the business case itself is clear. And then of course the human rights case, the social justice case is paramount and is really the imperative behind the sustainable development goals. So with that, I turn to Mr. George Moreira da Silva, who is the Director of Development Cooperation at OECD and is one of the architect of the Kampala Principles and the whole entire vision behind this study.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranjita. I'd like to thank the Ford Foundation as well as the Ford Letter for organizing this event after a very successful outcome of the GPDC last week. Our principles were part of the outcome of this GPDC meeting, but I'd like also to emphasize the monitoring report as well as the monitoring guidelines on the triangle cooperation. And it has proven again that the GPDC is a global public good. We tend to reinvent the wheel and to launch working groups and new platforms and new institutions. I always say that take a look, see what is there at the GPDC. The GPDC has been a very successful initiative, multi-stakeholder, based on inclusiveness, transparency, trust, and evidence. And I'm very happy to see the great results, and I'd like to congratulate the co-chairs for these results. Going directly to the Kampala principles, 3 years ago at Nairobi, during the annual meeting of the GPDC, there were some questions concerning the engagement with the private sector. Some questions were presented in a quite eloquent and bold manner. What are the safeguards for using public resources to engage the private sector? What are concrete results and outcomes of investing in the private sector, particularly for those firms stuck behind? How are private sector partnerships evaluated? What information is publicly available, and how are partners involved accountable to each other for using public resources? Those questions were tabled by many constituencies, and obviously we will need both co-chairs and OECD and UNDP to find a dialogue that would produce results that would be able to address these questions. When we started this journey on the principles led by our German colleagues and with many others, we knew that this is the terrain where many actors are already active. We want to avoid duplication of efforts and use synergies, so we looked at over 60 global, regional, and sectoral private sector platforms and initiatives, and we found that first, only about 25% of them have developing countries as active members. Second, only 10% examine effectiveness and results. And third, only 30% of them play a monitoring and accountability function for the private sector engagement efforts they support. This was the evidence that we collected when we assessed this private sector platform. With this in mind, we knew that the focus on the effective implementation of private sector partnerships at country level and the views of all actors would be the global partnership niche. We didn't want to duplicate efforts. We knew that there was a clear demand to answer to those questions. And led by multi-stakeholders, multi-actor working group, and esteemed business leaders caucus, and together with UNDP, we at OECD conducted 4 case studies with over 900 private sector engagement projects in Bangladesh, Egypt, El Salvador, and Uganda. I encourage you to read the case studies. They provide an important outlook of the type of issues at stake and lend themselves to peer learning and knowledge exchange across countries and regions. The fact that we managed to interlink the discussion on financing for development in Paris during our last edition of the Private Finance for Sustainable Development Week at OECD with the Business Leaders Caucus discussion within the GPDC created a synergy that I think was also useful to produce these Kampala principles. One key driver of this discussion of the Business Leaders Caucus has been the need to engage with the private sector as a genuine partner of development, not as a cash machine or implementer. Rather than engaging firms, investors, or even small informal sector companies from the beginning in any planning activity, is critical to share expectations, build trust, and manage risk among all partners. And there is also where a lot of capacity deficit lie in practice. After this journey, I'm convinced that development cooperation in all its forms can help amplify the ingenuity of private partners and scale up their development impact. And the Kampala principles now address, going directly to the Kampala principles now address the important concerns and questions raised 3 years ago in Nairobi. So Kampala principles are a clear answer to the questions that were tabled in Nairobi. I believe that they go a long way in building trust between all actors. This is a critical step if we are going to scale up collaboration between the development community and private sector to the level needed for SDGs. To conclude, let me highlight what the 5 areas of the principles cover that our members agreed in this spring in Kampala, where they heard their name. First, the inclusive country ownership, the importance of strengthening coordination, alignment, and capacity building at the country level to secure buy-in and leadership. Second, results and targeted impact. The focus of any PSC projects on sustainable development outcomes for groups most in need, ensuring that core business activities are compatible with objectives of the 2030 objective. Third, inclusive partnership, the need to foster trust through inclusive dialogue and consultation. Fourth, transparency and accountability. The understanding that measuring and disseminating sustainable development results is critical for learning and scaling up successes. And finally, leave no one behind. This last principle is the most novel, going beyond Busan principles. It emphasizes the importance of recognizing, sharing, and mitigating the risks for all partners to invest, particularly in places where private investment would otherwise not be made. To move beyond an aspirational set of guidelines, we need to continue working together, and now going directly to the most important part, which is implementation. This implementation phase is what I think will drive the discussion with the distinguished panelists. We would also like to see the Kampala principles being anchored in the whole partnership, monitoring in the long run. Monitoring report could and should also benefit from this learning exercise on implementation of the PEPAL principles, and this will surely incentivize delivery of the commitments development partner countries, private companies, and civil society organizations have made with this principle. Thank you very much for it.
Thank you, George, for that excellent summary of the report. Last year, when the Secretary General met with the business sector, he said very, very powerfully, the business sector enables collaboration across boundaries and time, and let us unleash innovations to unlock the potential of every person everywhere, especially women and young people. And as George said, leave no one behind is the clarion call to action. And I want indulge me and my love of Greek mythology when I quote Jupiter's prophecy in Virgil's Aeneid, where he said, "For them I set no boundaries in space and time," just as the Secretary General told the business community, collaborations across boundaries and time. So there are no boundaries in those collaborative efforts. And in the Kampala principles, the power, purpose, and the promise of these principles rest on the implementation of these principles. If not, they are aspirational auditory documents. And they are principles on paper, unless they are actualized into action. So my question to our distinguished panelists, who are stakeholders, who have so much at stake in implementing the Kampala principles, are two core questions. And that is, how do you intend to put into action at the country level? And that is, give me the tangible ways in which you're going to do that. And make it really pragmatic, so that these aspirational, auditory, inspirational documents can be actualized at a country level. And who are the partners? Who are the key partners that you think are instrumental in that journey to actualizing from paper to reality? So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Hirad Saviet, who is the CEO of the Fourth Sector Group, for his insights and his analysis on responding to those two questions.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here and partnering with our colleagues at OECD and UNDP Global Partnership on this gathering. I think, George, your call for transitioning from the excellent process that you've been through to come up with these principles to figuring out how to implement them is basically the next step. So I'm going to kind of focus on that. What does it actually take to bring these principles down from into action? So we all know it is impossible for the SDGs to be achieved without private sector engagement. It's impossible. And why is that? So before the SDGs, 5 years ago, we had some other global, we had some other set of global goals for development, right? So I'll call them the default goals for development, the DDGs. So what are the default goals for development? Basically, private sector growth is what creates jobs and creates the revenues that governments need, the tax revenues, it creates the revenues that philanthropy needs to take care of the problems the markets don't. So focusing on the growth of the private sector, basically is the top priority for development the world over. The challenge with the default development goals is what we're growing are models of enterprise, models of private sector business that basically externalize a lot of costs, social and environmental costs. So they create growth, they create jobs, but they also create environmental and social costs that are way more than the resources that governments and philanthropy can handle, basically mitigate. So we're in this spiral where the more we grow the economy to solve the problems of society, the more we scale the problems that it's causing. So the SDGs are in a way a response to that, right? So you've got to figure out a pattern of development where growth is not coupled with environmental and social destruction. So the private sector has a massive role to play because number one, it has to mitigate the externalities, the negative harm that it's creating. And number two, need the innovation and the resources and the entrepreneurship of private enterprise to deliver solutions at scale. No other institution can do that at that scale. So critical to engage the private sector the right way. And I think the principles are an excellent and important framework and guidance for how development cooperation and governments can figure out how to do that. Now the challenge is, imagine that we actually successfully implement those principles. What we need on the other side are private sector actors, businesses, that operate in a way that's consistent with the principles, right? Businesses that can operationalize deeply in their strategy and their priorities and their decision-making, social and environmental objectives that align with sustainability. So balancing profit with these other objectives. Unless we have businesses that can do that at scale across the economy, across the world, by 2030, we don't get there. So the trouble today is that businesses that actually try to embody sustainability at their core, purpose-driven businesses, businesses that have a different objective function than profit maximization. Instead of looking at people and planet as resources to extract value from, they look at people and planet as beneficiaries for whom they're creating value. That's a different logic of business. There's not an economy in the world today where that model of business has an equal level playing field compared to the old time. Not one single economy in the world that provides a level playing field for the kinds of businesses we need on the other side of this cooperation. So unless and until we figure out how to create that level playing field, we cannot expect the few unicorns that exist in the private sector that somehow, against the grain of policy and capital markets and incentives and the education and training system that trains business leaders to think about one objective function, which is profit extraction or profit maximization at the cost of environmental and social extraction. Unless we figure out how to solve that problem, we can't expect to implement the principles. So I think sort of one of the primary goals and strategies for implementation is figure out how to create a level playing field so that the businesses that do want to actually engage in an effective way towards sustainability and delivering on the SDGs, not by just cherry picking one or two of them and rebranding and marketing their CSR initiatives that way, but deeply embedding them into their strategy, deeply embedding them into the way they think about every aspect of what they do, deeply embedding them into their ownership and governance structure. Unless we create a level playing field, those kinds of businesses can't deliver what we expect from them also. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So two key takeaways and two key terms that you used over and over again were scaling and leveling the playing field. So scaling, as it's used in business, and the aim of scaling is to reach more people. So you would think that scaling connotes that leveling of the playing field by reaching all and being inclusive. However, what we see in the scaling is that people are left behind because the ways in which businesses operate and the typical business notion of scaling means it's about the profit margin. So I think juxtaposing scaling with leaving no one behind is imperative today. So collaboration for scale is of course not alien to the private sector. And globalization has allowed for the creation of intricate supply chains that cross continents, involve a diverse set of participants, and demand enmeshed collaboration. And the skills, techniques, and lessons learned by international businesses are invaluable to effectively bring development innovation to all. And so that brings us to our next speaker, Mr. Marcos Neto, Director of UNDP's Finance Sector, to really talk about collaboration for scale. Mr. Neto, collaboration for scale, what does it involve? And I want you to respond to that question because sustainable growth of innovation means adopting a set of interlocking good practices that use the Kampala principles but also scale up in a way that allows for no one left behind.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank everybody for this event and praise the collaboration between the co-chairs and the PPC in the larger business partnership and the teams that somebody reminded me that we started this process 3 years ago. Somehow I was part of the beginning of it, and I kind of drop off, but I'd like to be back in that conversation. I think what you said is absolutely correct in terms of the level playing field and the collaboration, in terms of the fact that we cannot do the SDGs without the private sector. I think the Kampala principles is welcome because we have to change the behavior of business, right? And this principle is as one piece of this puzzle of changing behavior of business. Back to your original question in terms of what happens now, I think we need to put some guidelines, some elements here on how business as well as governments and civil society can use, monitor, and enforce these principles. I think it's important to put the guidelines in the same kind of participatory bottom-up approach to the principles of the created. The case studies and so on and so forth. And we are UNDP very happy to work with the OECD and others in advancing their guidelines going forward on a bottom-up approach. Now, I'm optimistic. I actually believe we are in a moment of transition, right? I think business has started to understand that the SDGs are a business opportunity. And let's not kid ourselves. If it isn't a business opportunity, you're going to end up with CSI, nothing else, right? And we have to move beyond CSI. So the good news is that there are $12 trillion of business opportunities per annum in the SDGs for the companies that are integrated into their core business. I completely agree with you that sometimes you've got, we at UNDP run a platform called the Business Call to Action, which is focused on including sustainable business models. There are 260 companies of all sizes and from everywhere in the world. This platform is actually run out of our Global Private Sector Hub, which is a partnership with the Turkish government. It sits in Istanbul, or Istanbul International Private Sector Center. And what we've learned with those companies is a desire to do it, but to transform business demands collaboration. Business doesn't necessarily know how to do this alone, right? And it really needs help. So recently, a very large company, really large company, came to me and said, we want to have 300 million more clients in Africa. And I looked at them and said, okay, what are you going to do for energy for those 300 million new clients you want in Africa? They said, well, I'm not an energy company. Well, but your products need energy. If you want to reach the base of the pyramid, if you want to leave no one behind, you have to understand that those consumers that you want to reach, those products you want to offer, are not simply going to be done in the same way you do it in North America or you do in Europe. You actually have a responsibility to figure out the energy solution. Otherwise, there's no point of you trying to reach these people because your products need energy to run. And by the way, that energy has to be renewable. And by the way, what is the circular economy end product of your product, right? How are you going to dispose of it? They started to look at me and said, really? I'm a technology company. Well, to reach 300 million people in Africa, you have to adapt your business. Ready to partner, ready to bring the government, ready to put the renewable energy. You don't need to become a renewable energy company, but you have to bring the renewable energy company to be your collaborator so you can actually collaborate at scale for nobody being left behind. So I think that is the kind of examples, the kind of business transformation that we're starting to see, right? And we're starting to see at scale. So right now in the world, you have $37 trillion. The fast growing asset class in the world is environmental social development asset classes, right? It's growing exponentially. Now, it's still not SDG investment. It's still a passive checklist that I'm doing no harm. But that investor that is moved that way, thus gives us the opportunity, because they've already internalized some aspects of more than just profit maximization. So then starting moving the needle from a do no harm negative screening to a proactive search for a triple bottom line return. And we're starting to see this, right? So that movement has to be speed up, right? That is, the problem today is not that we don't have it. So we don't have it at a fast pace enough for the challenges that we're facing. And the challenge is keeping compound. Climate change is just making life more difficult and keep on compounding. So it's not that we don't have examples, it's that we don't have policies. In the Philippines, we work with the Philippine government to create a certification for inclusive business attached to a tax incentive, creating a level playing field. Eventually, we're talking to the Philippine government to say, well, can you now start taking away the tax incentives to the other type of business, right? So you have a systemic change, but it's not fast enough, right? And I think what we need to think is where the compounding principles can play a role, together with other principles, where the guidelines need to think about it here is how do we speed up the systemic transformation we're starting to see in the world, right? And as I said on the examples that I gave, if you don't bring these collaborations, and these collaborations is business to NGOs, business to governments, and governments have to play a role. And governments have to understand what kind of market signals they are going to send to business. Keep on funding and providing fossil fuel subsidies to $5.7 trillion since their Paris Accord, according to the IMF, is not the right market signals from governments, right? So everybody has to come together to generate that collaboration scale, and we look forward to be part of this process going forward. Thank you.
Marcos, you spoke about systemic transformation and the basic pivot as important ways to envision the world, the new age of the SDGs. And we also spoke about the importance of environmental sustainability, but I want to ask our next panelist to also look at financial inclusion. Recently, a JP Morgan financier here in New York told me, because the biggest financiers here in New York told me, the JP Morgan model does not work anymore in the global south. And the financial inclusion model of mobile money, mobile technology has made it possible for the unbankable to be banked. And I think that is why we need to really re-envision the JP Morgan model of financing. It does not work in the globalized world. It does not work in the global south. So I think having that kind of approach to looking at the base of the pyramid and how they can become of the marketplace, and how the base of the pyramid can be seen as real investors in the global economy. And looking at the base of the pyramid as being innovators and entrepreneurs and agents of change in entrepreneurship, and how the private sector can make use of that new vision for the world, and how financially inclusive models can make use of ICTs, can make use of technologies in a way that we lessen what could be the double-edged sword nature of emerging technologies. Because that could also create greater divisions that could do more harm than good. So first, do no harm. I think that was your first principle. And I think that's important. So with that, I want to turn to our next distinguished speaker, Cheryl Dorsey, President of Echoing Green, to provide specific examples from Echoing Green's work on principle number 2, but also how this can become real on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for moderating this session. I'm honored to be here with all of you today. I am going to talk about this work through the lens of social entrepreneurship and recognizing that social entrepreneurs, which I define as a solutionist for the public good, can be, should be an important actor in the SDG process moving forward. So let me just start by saying that the last mile work that really needs to be done to drive real and lasting change on the ground in communities is really critical and will ultimately be a very heavy lift because of the significant chasm that exists between rooftop actors versus grassroots communities. And for those of us who work from sort of the ground level, see a real lack of trust, lack of authentic relationships, and robust, effective collaborative spaces where this work really has to be done if it's going to be successful and sustainable. So that's one reason that we at Echoing Green believe that social entrepreneurs are an incredibly important actor for SDG success. Again, I'm talking about social entrepreneurs as solutionists for the public good. They're transformational community leaders who are deeply embedded in the communities that they serve. And they're so important because they do their work through an impact-first and human-centered approach that allows them to really develop effective solutions that work for those communities that they serve. So social entrepreneurs and social innovation, the hallmark of social innovation is really this concept of the blurring of sectoral boundaries, I think are already exhibiting their participation in the SDGs. I was going to share 3 specific examples, but listening to my colleagues now, I'm actually going to share 4 quick examples. First, I think social entrepreneurs are important as translators, secondly as bridgers, and third as collaborators, and fourth as accountability partners. So let me walk through those 4 examples. So first is translation work. So Echoing Green, and for those of you who don't know, we're angel investors in the social sector. We work with individual actors in communities who are looking to start social enterprises regardless of corporate form. So in talking to leaders in community on the ground, we found that there was not a lot of training or guidance for social entrepreneurs to increase their knowledge and literacy around the SDGs. It's really interesting that when we looked out across the landscape, there was some work, some off-the-shelf resources that really were focused more on sort of at the business level, for governments, for large NGOs, for funding institutions, as well as for some citizen level work, but not, interestingly enough, for social entrepreneurs. So we are actually now in the process of piloting some resources for social entrepreneurs that we look forward to release more broadly to social entrepreneurs working around the world. So we'll look forward to staying in touch with you around that. And the key around this is that we think we can really be a vital partner in filling this gap in content for the market. And we believe that if we can deliver it successfully, we will be able to address this knowledge and information gap between early stage social entrepreneurs and the broader ecosystem in which they must operate. That's the first thing. The second example I want to give is sort of the bridging work that needs to be done with social entrepreneurs and the broader business community. So 2 examples. About 2 years ago, Echoing Green launched a really exciting partnership with TPG's RISE Fund. If you all are familiar with the RISE Fund, a $2.5 billion social impact fund, we were able to go to them and launch an innovative partnership that is allowing us with the RISE Fund to mobilize capital and business expertise to expand social entrepreneurs' impact. So it's quite interesting. The average ticket size to date for the RISE Fund investment is about 60 million, 70 million per deal. They have gone way upstream early stage to work with our social entrepreneurs to do, 6-figure, low 7-figure investments in our social impact social entrepreneurs. And I think this is the kind of partnership where we all give a little that takes us out of our comfort zone to learn together, that is really going to have to be a hallmark of us working together to achieve SDGs. That's one example. A second example, working with a government funder, about a year ago, we launched a partnership with the U.S. African Development Foundation to provide both debt and equity follow-on funding to entrepreneurs, Africa-based African entrepreneurs doing doing social impact work on the continent. So I think two great examples of how social entrepreneurs can come together with business and government to drive change. Third, I'm going to give you a domestic example of what collaboration looks like in community. One of our terrific social entrepreneurs, Jenna Nicholas, who runs a social enterprise called Impact Experience, is showing us all what's possible in terms of bringing impact investors together with local government leaders, with community leaders. And we actually recently co-authored a piece with Jenna for the UN publication on the next generation of work for the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, and happy to share that with you all if that's of interest. And in this piece, we highlight the work that Jenna and her team are doing in Williamson, West Virginia, a town working to overcome the challenges stemming from the decline of the U.S.'s declining coal industry. This is a town where more than 2,000 coal workers have lost their jobs since 2014. That number may not seem important, but when you recognize that it represents 25% of the town's entire workforce, you understand how important this issue is. So Impact Experience has been working in Williamson for the last few years using a local organizing model to co-develop solutions between impact investors, philanthropists, entrepreneurs, and community leaders. And this is deep trust building work, and I can't emphasize this enough. It's about how do you build social capital to the facilitation of deeper trust in communities. And as a result of this collaboration, Impact Experience was able to help develop a federally qualified healthcare center in that community, a health innovation hub, broadband infrastructure projects, investments in ecosystem, ecotourism projects, and workforce development efforts around solar energy industry, as well as a mobile farmers market. And when you start to think about the dollars and sort of the lives served as a result of this, this effort has already attracted more than $8 million in this community, created more than 300 jobs, and is now serving more than 20,000 patients in this health center, all of whom are living below the U.S. poverty line. So I think it's a great example of how deep, sustainable collaboration can lead to real change. The last thing I want to quickly note in hearing from my other participants is the notion of accountability for the SDGs and how the private sector needs to think about its role in progress. So in March, the IFC published the final version of its impact investing operating principles for impact management. And these principles, like model principles, are a set of voluntary guidelines for impact investors, touching on not only impact strategy, but also assessment, and most importantly, monitoring for the negative impacts of their investments. And I share this example because one of our social entrepreneurs, Natalie Bridgman Fields, who runs a social enterprise called Accountability Council, which is a human rights organization that advocates for people harmed by internationally financed projects, participated deeply in the drafting of this submission, as another great example of how social entrepreneurs can work with government and the private sectors to make sure these goals work for all. And as you're saying, Madam Moderator, making sure no one is left behind. So thank you.
Words, and most of all, the dynamism and vision that you bring to your work. It's so exciting to be with a woman who is a leader, who is a visionary, and who is leading the men in the room and men on the panel. So thank you. I had to do that. But I have to invoke another woman who is not in this room, but I met last week. And I interviewed her for the study that I'm doing for UN Women, Natalie Javanwe, who is the CEO of EcoCash in Zimbabwe. And she serves on the Secretary General's high-level working group on digitalization of financing for the SDGs. And the EcoCash mission is to achieve cash like Zimbabwe and to make the most unbankable bankable. And I think what we see there with the EcoCash model is the way with digital mobile banking services, those who are exceedingly poor and those who cannot afford the kind of maintenance fees, the prohibitive account minimums, and the traditional commercial banking that excludes women in the margins and the frontiers of life, and in the frontiers of conflict to become part of an inclusive economy. So the challenge to me, Sherry, is everything that you spoke about, impact investment and social entrepreneurship, is being now redefined in a way that even traditional entrepreneurs are seeing themselves as social entrepreneurs and as impact investors. So as you said, these lines and boundaries are collapsing and are blurring, right? And so we are not seeing a dichotomized world anymore, but in a world where all of us are social entrepreneurs and are engaging in social impact initiatives. So with that, I want to next turn to Paulo Veloci. Paulo, can you too, like Cheryl, provide specific examples of how to actualize the principles? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, members of the panel, audience. Well, we are equity investors in Brazil in SDG aligned companies. And for our experiences, I see that I would like to specifically qualify two groups of challenges that we faced in doing impact investments in Brazil, and in each group give two examples. One, I qualify as the optimization of regulations. And we have noticed that when you optimize regulations, especially in energy and infrastructure and financial services, the money flows automatically. So we've been working, for instance, in solar distributed energy in Brazil, developing net metering regulations, and I think now the country has achieved a situation when Bloomberg Finance projects 30% of the energy matrix in Brazil will be solar distributed energy in 2040. So this is one example. Another example that we work is related to urban land titling, urban property rights. In Brazil, we have between 18 to 20 million people that live in favelas, slums, irregularly occupied land. And the regulations make it almost impossible for them. The regulations require infrastructure characteristics that make it impossible for them to acquire their plots. So we have been working with municipalities, judicial system, resequencing the infrastructure regulations so they are able to buy their plots. So this is the first group. And the second group, which is pretty much related with leave no one behind principle, is the need of blended finance and talent. It's very, very difficult to put together a feasible business model when we deal with very vulnerable clients. So blended finance can play a very important role bridging the time that the business model needs to mature to the benefit which is profitability. And also, the most important thing that we need, the critical thing that we need in business is the attraction, retention, and allocation of talent. This is the difference between success or failure. So blended finance also is very important in bringing very good management talent in to these business ventures. So this is specifically so in areas of education. We have an investment in education that we have received philanthropic money. We have received $3 million that allows us to develop the business model for 2 years to reach now 15 million students in 10 Brazilian states. And the second one is related to housing to very poor people. So we received $1 million in a company to develop management systems and information technology. Still, we are not still there in terms of profitability in these two investments, but we hope to be there soon. So, Madam Moderator, these were my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So glad that we invoke the importance of the next generation investing next generation. And that reminded me of a close friend who is one of Silicon Valley's major business investors who told me once, he was a law school classmate of mine, I don't fund business plans, I fund people. Right, so business are at the heart, the people are at the heart of businesses and people are at the heart of the sustainable development goals. And with that, I want to open up the floor to all stakeholders here in this room, because this is really your set of principles, guiding principles that you are going to use and operationalize. So questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very enriching panel. I'm Mu'taz Ekar. I'm the Senior Advisor to the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation in Egypt. And we are proud to be one of the 4 case studies that have participated in this important initiative. My question is for the IFIs. We have to think with the IFIs to provide the proper and relevant financial instruments to support the role of the private sector. Actually, what's happening now is that the governments are providing the regulatory environment, very lucrative regulatory environments from the government side. What is needed is the support of the IFIs through the blended financing that we spoke about, that Mr. Powell spoke about. This is really needs to be more explored and supported by bodies like the OECD and the UNDP to have the technical capacity to provide this insight. Thank you.
I would like you to introduce yourself. Hi everyone, this is working. I'm Kaylee Taylor with the SDG Lab at the UN Geneva. Cheryl mentioned this deep trust building and the translation role, and we certainly feel that there's a deep need for that as well. One of the challenges we come across, maybe not it's not the case everywhere, is that funding that role can be very challenging. So I was wondering if anyone has seen examples of innovative funding mechanisms for those connecting type roles, those roles that are bringing the various entities together, because it seems to be a challenge for the SDG era.
Thank you. So we'll take a couple of questions and then we'll ask us.
I'm from the Energy Network Development, Civil Society Organization based in Beirut, Lebanon. I mean, I have a question, or let's say a kind of a concern that we really need to think collectively about. I mean, when talking about the Kampala principles, the challenges were raised. And they rightfully highlight the lack of safeguard, the weak accountability and transparency, and many other challenges and concerns. And I think that we really need the challenge is how we can address these challenges, taking into consideration the trade-offs and let's say the impact that applies. That the more you have growth, the more you have inequality, and the experience showed this. I mean, the more you have businesses, the more you have flexibility in the labor market and the social dimensions, etc. So the question is how or what kind of efforts are being done in order to address these challenges, and where are the guiding principles for businesses and human rights that are United Nations document, by the way, in this regard? Are the human rights respected in the whole process? Taking into consideration that all the panelists, none of you mentioned human rights and the human rights standards, except the moderator, which mentioned the women's. So thank you.
Good question. And thank you for holding us accountable. Yes. And we are going to all of you, we are going to hear from all of you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Eva and I also represent the CPDE, the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness, Civil Society. We are also partners at the GPDC, and I congratulate the GPDC and the panelists for a very interesting conversation. Sometimes we are perceived, civil society, as the anti-private sector. We are not, we are anti-human rights violations. So Alice was already talking about it. It's interesting to see that the human rights language is absent from the principles, although we consider them conducive and good beginning. I would like to hear the panelists' opinion on, do you need a legally binding normative UN instrument to control and to achieve human rights and fulfillment, respect and protection for civil society and the community and people? I also represent the Alliance.
He's going to come back to it, but he had his hand up. Yes.
In the front.
In the front.
Thank you. So this is Inigo Albizuri from Montrano Corporation. We're a member of the Business Council's leaders for private sector engagement, so private sector. Well, congratulations for all the examples that we can see here. And all of them are very positive examples. But this doesn't fit the information that George has given to us in order of the level of success. So going to the principle number 4, just like a suggestion for transparency, don't you think that it should be a great exercise to put into the table all those bad projects where we have hundreds of problems? Because it's especially from those negative experience where we can really learn to improve. Otherwise, it seems to be heaven, but we know that it is not. Okay? Just as a suggestion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Nurul Janarva, former Women's NGOs of Kyrgyzstan, and I speak here on behalf of feminist group of the Civil Society Platform for Development Effectiveness, CPDE. First, probably if we're talking about innovative partnership, it would be strategically important to ensure that civil society participation is institutionalized. So that there were processes, there were accountability, there were responsibilities, so that civil society was contributed meaningfully. Civil society has intensive experience working on the ground, and they can have different roles. Second, thank you very much to the chair for reminding the audience about women's rights and women's approach, women's participation. It would be probably I would like to recommend to consider that in discussion on innovative partnership, to consider temporary special measures for increasing of women's role and women's participation as business women, but also as beneficiaries, to consider who is and to have a clear strategy to address needs of those who are owning women as business owners, especially on the ground in SMEs, and those who are benefiting. And probably in any partnership, it would be extremely important if private sector wants to participate in reaching SDG, to create accountability line for women's rights, for human rights. Otherwise, alongside with rights on environmental sustainability. Otherwise, it will be a lost opportunity. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mustafa Turan, representing SDG Impact Accelerator Board co-chair based in Istanbul, which is a new initiative, a multi-stakeholder one between the government, UNDP, Turkish private sector, and Gates Foundation. So we recently launched our accelerator, and one of the challenges that we face now is that we would like to establish a fund, an impact fund for the accelerator. And the blended finance is something that we are looking into. And one of the issues that we face is that the impact that is expected by the investors need to be measurable. So this whole issue of impact measurement, I was wondering if there's anyone in the panel who would speak about the best practices of impact measurement so that we can see how we can incorporate it in our project. Thank you.
So my name is Kelvin Havenkamp. I'm the Executive Director of the World Benchmarking Alliance, which is a collective of civil society organizations, investors, and business groups that are together working on translating SDGs into pathways and benchmarks focused on the world's biggest companies. So think about the world's 2,000 biggest companies and their delivery on the SDGs. We do a lot of work in translating the SDGs into roadmaps for companies and then coming up with the criteria that help companies to account both on the offensive side where they can contribute and on the defensive side where they prevent or do no harm. Essentially, this is all about transparency and accountability, but the mechanism that we use is not suitable for many of the companies that we talk about here, the SMEs, because it's too strong of a system. But if I can make a suggestion, and maybe in response to some of the things, the concerns that I shared, that have been shared here in the room, is if we think about accountability, that is probably something that we cannot outsource to one entity, right? There's no global government, but there are a lot of actors in our society that have a role in keeping each other accountable. Civil society, governments, financial institutions, and in all the different forms and shapes that they take, the UN. So would it be an idea, in response to some of the concerns that there were about how we operationalize accountability, to translate Principle 4 into some sort of idea about principles and actions around accountability, and then not to pinpoint that to one institution or to one sector, but to create a landscape and to describe the landscape that could enforce such an accountability system, particularly for the smaller companies, because this is where some of the instruments that we work on will not reach and are not sufficient.
My name is Maureen Connolly. I'm an external event fellow with One Earth Future. And we have developed a convening design that I'm so impressed with what you discussed here today, and appreciate it, particularly the facilitators' ability to bring it into actionable discussion. I just wanted to let you know our design is called Innovation and Partnerships, Making a Business Case for Peace. And we have done the alpha test here at the UN and in-country tests in Somalia and Colombia. I am happy to talk with all of you about it, but it really hits on many of the things you discussed today. How do you engage in inclusivity? How do you have a vetted discussion that leads to a commitment to action? And what is the catalyst to bring your principles into commitments to action? So I just want to let you know that our foundation has designed this, and I'd be happy to share our theory of impact paper and discuss it with you today. Thank you.
So I think what we will do now is to take some of these questions and then come back to, I saw 3 hands first. So there are 3 hands? 1, 2, just 2? Yeah. Oh, okay, so okay, so then maybe we can quickly take 3 more. I do want to put the whole inclusion principle into practice by making sure that all voices are heard.
So I'm Fraser Riley King. I'm an analyst with Canada's International Development Research Centre. We've just put out a book on scaling impact. which may be of interest. I think there's a lot of connections with the principles you're talking about here today. Our commitment to open access, you can download it for free. One of the elements of that is core principles, not the unique principles on top of principles, but in the context of scaling, it talks about 4 elements. So moral justification, so balancing the sort of imperative to scale with the obligations that you've got to others, other responsibilities that maybe mean that you don't always scale. Inclusive coordination, so scaling that involves those who are going to be impacted by this. Optimal scale, so I think there's a tendency to focus on how can we maximize impact. This tries to shift it to think about sometimes maximizing impact doesn't always work scale. So thinking about what's the optimal level that you can reach at scale. And then finally, dynamic evaluation, which I think has come up in a lot of conversations, that you need to evaluate the impacts of your scale with different scales. So that's hopefully a useful complement to that. Just maybe a question for you as well, since the focus of our organization is on providing resources to researchers in the South to find new scientific research and find solutions. Where do you see the nexus with this discussion in research?
Hi, Shannon Kinnerney. I'm Director of Research Policy and Practice at the Canadian Council for International Cooperation, and prior to that, I was very much involved in the development of these principles. And I guess participating in the GPEC event over the weekend, the senior level meeting, and here today, one thing that I worry about is hero models, right? Like these principles are the result of a need that's been clearly articulated. The research has shown gaps. And I think often we hear, show us examples of these principles in action. But the reason we have these is because there's not enough action. And so I would just like to hear from the panel what success looks like. Does it look like a robust monitoring framework? Does it look like guidelines rolled out? What does it look like in terms of the policy frameworks at country level, at global level? You know, in 10 years from now, how will you know that you've succeeded in improving private sector engagement in your view?
Thank you. My name is Suvi Virkunen. I'm from Finland, Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Development Policy Department, working on results on our development policy. Finland is one of those provider countries that have hugely increased its spending finance in recent years. And in our country, the discussion among stakeholders are really about the results, the impact of these new kinds of initiatives. And I think I really appreciate the Kampala principles emphasizing the issues and results in many of these principles, those sub principles. And I'd like to discuss a bit with the panel the comment here or the principle here that we need to ensure sustainable results by aligning business and the development interests, as well as under transparency and accountability. It is talking about measuring results and disseminating the results. Coming back to your question about learning from the not so good experiences, I think in results-based management of development policy, this is what we want. We want to learn from the not so good results in order to achieve them. So can you please talk about that a little bit and whether your collaboration with the government is improving your results?
Bolivia behind basically is we should reach villages actually, and we should reach the Kampala principle as macro level. This is K.S. Raju from India. We came up with based upon SDGs and all. We came up with a model with don't talk about smart cities, talk about smart villages. Macro level thinking is actually, especially most of the India is most of the people are farmers, uneducated women, most of the people are very poor and all. To make you achieve this thing, to achieve your goal, what I call is leave no behind. We should achieve smart villages, we achieve the macro level, Kampala, especially macro level. How the panel, all the stakeholders can give what idea, how we can make the Kampala principles to reach at a macro village, whatever. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So I have the daunting task of conceptualizing all of these wonderful comments, very insightful, very introspective comments, and then asking each of my panelists to share their insights in very sharp but succinct manner to address some of those challenges that you put forth. So I'm going to start with Kirag and go down the map of the sustainable development goals. But 1 minute, I'm going to be extremely rigid about the timeline.
Thank you. So what's the question?
But the primacy of human rights. I think what came out of here was the rights language was absent in the Kampala principles, but how do we bring that forward? Because I think if we answer that question, it will cover most of the questions that were brought here.
Okay, and I'll expand that to say human rights and rights of the rest of life on the planet, because all life has rights. So how do we create an economic model and system that by 2030, next 10 years, what does success look like? Where the rights, the dignity of all life is embedded in the way we think about business, how we do trade. The answer is we figure out what that model of business looks like. Cheryl mentioned a few that are in her fellowship program. There's tens of millions every year, new business startups that start with the logic of purpose. Tens of millions new ones every year in every village and hamlet around the world. However, no government, as I said earlier, has a comprehensive, systematic support environment for those models of business. We don't have the financial, we have lots of innovation, decades of it, in terms of rethinking metrics, in terms of rethinking finance, rethinking aspects of policy, but we don't have a systematic method and process for creating that enabling environment. And yet every year we spend hundreds of billions of dollars doing economic development, which is ecosystem development for traditional private sector enterprises. So for-sector development is a way of recognizing that for-benefit businesses are a different logic than traditional for-profits. They require a level playing field, their own comprehensive ecosystem. If we build that ecosystem, we can do it in 2 years in every country starting out. If we build that comprehensive ecosystem, we can get to trillions of dollars of economic activity by 2030 with that model of enterprise where human rights and the dignity of the rest of life are embedded in the core logic of enterprise. There's a report that we have put out with some partners at UNDP and Sahib and a number of other folks. I think most of you have a copy, but there'll be more out there. We're basically asking everyone for their input on thinking about this, and we invite everyone to engage. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcus?
Few things. On the issue of impact, we actually just released, a colleague from the World Benchmark Alliance should have in his inbox. We just released the first standards for private equity for SDG enabling investment. We're going to be releasing the second standards on bonds in the third enterprise. This is all being converted in a certification process, and there's going to be a seal attached to it. We have to differentiate from an investment point of view what is SDG wash and what is being aligned with the SDGs. So at UNDP we have something called SDG Impact, which Paul knows, and we've been talking to him, and those standards will basically be available to any fund manager, and anyone that can actually measure and decide what impact is. What is success look like in 10 years? One, you don't need to call a business a purpose-driven business. One inclusive business model, right? That is business. We are going to differentiate the ones that are not that, right? So that is what success looks like in 10 years. This becomes the mainstream. That's the way business is done. That's the way the government regulate. That's the way the legal environment is in place. Not going to be easy. We have no choice. We have to make this happen, right? In that sense. Human rights, we at UNDP have a very large program on business and human rights. We are based entirely on the human rights principles. We train companies on business and human rights. We assess the value chain on business and human rights. We are training governments how to regulate the business on business in terms of human rights. There's a lot going on that. Yeah, right. Research, I was talking here on business models, right? How can you perfect the business models that are profitable, environmental, and socially responsible at the same time? how do you help that research go forward? How do you find the, the levers of management that need to happen? So it's actually a business school research for different type of business models that we discussed today. That's the research agenda, I would.
Well, just two points. One on the human rights, and obviously the principles are not trying to supplement, duplicate, or undermine acquis. And for us, human rights is an acquis, and the principles go beyond those acquis from the Busan principles, acquis from the UN declaration. So I understand the point made by some colleagues about this is missing. We don't consider it's missing because the principles are rooted, of course, on all those acquis and goes beyond. But I think it's a very valid point to be made. Second, on impact investment and blended finance. Blending is trending and social impact investment is on the rise. But we need to get it right. And getting it right means that we need measurement, accountability, reporting, etc. So OECD, first, we agree that the act on the blended finance principles, making sure that we are not just drowning in public and private money. We are aligning this blending towards the SDGs. Second, we are developing a measurement tool on impact investment. Because there is not one single definition about what is impact investment. You have several initiatives in place, but there is no harmonization or standardization of how you measure impact. So we are doing some work on this domain, obviously in collaboration with other institutions, and I think it's very much in line with what is requested.
I'm going to take a minute as the moderator to reflect on some of the questions and comments that were shared with us this morning. And one of the questions and comments addressed the need for concrete examples of the ways in which the human rights agenda, the women's rights agenda, can be better aligned with the Kampala principles and with the private sector partnerships. And I want to share with you a couple of examples from my own works on interviewing and engaging with leaders of corporate America and corporations around the world. So Ginny Rometty of IBM has talked very clearly and concisely about the need for returnships for women who have taken time off to take care of their families, and how do they re-enter the workplace, and returnships are one way of helping women to ease back into the world. Second, my conversations with Pepsi reveals that the supply chains, map the world. It is almost like a supply chain that consists of an empire of workforce members. And in India, the importance of building bathrooms and toilets and making sure that the supply chain have access to clean water, have access to sanitation. So that's another way of making sure that women who form the bottom of the pyramid in this supply chain have access to sanitation that otherwise may not have been available to them. And thirdly, working with youth, IBM has created new collar jobs. So it's not blue collar, it's not white collar, but new collar jobs that train young people to engage in a brave new world that is being ushered in a new era by new technologies. And then finally, I want to end on an inspirational note, though the statistics are dire. WHO estimates that 2 billion people don't have access to the medicines they need. So my question to the CEO of Novartis, Vas Narasimhan, was how are you, as a person of conscience, as a physician, as a leader, addressing this need in the world? And for him, his answer was, both as a businessman, but also as a humanist. For me as a physician, he told me, this is not acceptable. How will we change the course of disease in those parts of the world is often what drives me during the day and in the night. How do we address disease in places that are unseen on a map, that are often not part of the cartography of business? I want nothing more than to create incredible innovations that reimagine medicine and then get these medicines to the millions of people around the world who need them. Because he said, in the final analysis, this is not about the bottom line, it is about how will history remember us. What kind of a world are we leaving behind? So I think this then is really the driving urge for the Kampala principles to be actualized. How will history remember us as a people, as a nation, and as a world?
Thank you. I think I'm probably the only person what we believe or we still believe that all these principles, including SDGs and all these initiatives, if you want to do something, if you want to take they want to change anything, that has to be dealt at the country. So what you need, I mean, as well-structured implementation structure at the country level, involving all the stakeholders, discuss everything here. Because if you have a good practice, that may not fit for case Bangladesh or Brazil. So we would like to discuss everything details at the country level, and then review it and then go for implementation, because there will be challenges which can be dealt only at the country. So our message is, let's have a well-structured body at the country level, review all this and prepare an action plan, and then work on it, and review it, and then work on it first. And just in addition to the question that Madam Moderator has asked about women empowerment, is something unbelievable in Bangladesh, to be honest. It's a country where you have 80 million women. And most of these women, where you have majority of them who are living in the countryside, they are well addressed to one of the biggest social security programs in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a terrific conversation. I learned so much, so thank you for including me. So I'll make 3 quick points. To your point about sort of the funding for some of this trust building work, sort of this currency, social capital, currency generation, not enough funding out there, right? So again, here I mentioned sort of some of these ecosystem players. I think those are the breadcrumbs that some of us who are trying to do more of this work need to look towards, because I think this ecosystem build is really how we're going to get to some of this work. I also think local governments who can use their bully pulpit and their convening authority should be a real leader in bringing groups together to have these kinds of conversations. So that's the first thing. The impact measurement conversation is really important. A lot of our early stage social entrepreneurs get locked out of this because that sort of measurement is onerous for early stage enterprises, GEARS, IRIS, these other frameworks that are just heavy if you're just trying to start out. So I think we need to sort of hack those impact measurement overlays for early stage entrepreneurs to make sure more of them getting through. I would also suggest that we take a look at some of the opportunity zones work that is happening here in the United States. There have been some framework that has come out around impact measurement as more capital is flowing into communities here in the U.S. And I think it'll be interesting to follow what groups like the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance and the Beck Center have done around creating a shared framework for impact measurement. Could be some interesting lessons to learn. And then I also think there are opportunities for entrepreneurs, accountability entrepreneurs, right? So folks who are going to hold groups accountable as this SDG work gears up. And I'm thinking of social enterprises like Labor Voices, which is a crowdsourcing work site that allows workers to input information about the companies where they work, or a social enterprise called Accountability Lab that really trains citizens on innovative anti-corruption initiatives. So I think there are opportunities for citizens to think about how are we more innovative in holding the private sector accountable. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over time.
So very quickly on the question of impact measurement and also GEARS, IRIS. is a way, but when we receive an investment at Novi, we ask what is the theory of change of the entrepreneur. So qualify, describe, articulate, and quantify the theory of change, integrating it with the business research.
So the theory of change is an excellent way to end, because I'm going to ask Udo not to spend 1 minute, but to spend 5 minutes to get an extra 4 minutes. Because you are going to inspire us, and we're going to end this conversation on that inspirational note of what is the theory of change that we need to propel forward these private-public partnerships and the Kampala.
Thank you very much. That's quite a challenge. I'm not sure if I'm up to it. But I think we'll have 2 or 3 ideas on the way forward. So my fellow panelists, microphones. Better with the microphone. My fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking you all for this lively debate and for your exciting inputs. I think there's no need to point out anymore that cooperation with the private sector is vital to the achievement of the global development goals. The Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation has done quite a bit in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, to mainstream the global effectiveness principles for development cooperation with the private sector. Through case studies and surveys, it has created a sound basis of data, which was urgently needed for our further discussion. And through dialogue meetings, the Global Partnership has successfully engaged the different stakeholders that work on this topic and fostered an intensive exchange. We launched the GPDC Business Leaders Corpus in 2018. The establishment of this high-ranking business advisory board has enabled us to engage in a direct exchange with the private sector, and I would like to thank the representatives of the corpus that are here with us today. I can say that the work of the corpus has shown us that true progress on the effectiveness debate can only be made if all relevant stakeholders are on board and if stakeholders engage in a dialogue between equals. It is also vital to use the existing expertise and individual experience for the way forward. We did exactly that when we drafted the Kampala Principles. Without the knowledge, experience and input of the various members of the group, the principles could not have become what they are. And I think the debate in the last days has shown us they will become truly a milestone in the effectiveness process. Cooperation with the private sector will surely remain a focus of the global partnership for the years to come after this senior level meeting. At the senior level meeting last weekend, the GPDC launched the Kampala Principles, involving the private sector more than ever before in the global effectiveness agenda. Now, and we have heard this a few times today, we have to translate the principles into practical action. We need to be active, we all need to be active in disseminating the principles. We have to make the principles known to all stakeholders. So one of our first questions is, how can we make sure that all the stakeholders actually know about the principles and discover their relevance before we even discuss further steps? And for this, I think an effective and coordinated networking on all levels will help us to achieve this. Here we all represent different stakeholder groups. In the GPDC, we represent very many stakeholders. We need to get active in networking and making the principles known. At the senior level meeting, my Parliamentary State Secretary, Mr. Norbert Bartlett, made a call to action. Based on this, I wish to invite you to join hands to bring the Kampala Principles to life. Our aim is to develop practical and hands-on guidelines. The guidelines have not been mentioned yet. We think guidelines can be helpful in complementing or supplementing the Kampala Principles for the implementation.
of the principles in the engagement of the private sector. We recognize the need that these guidelines will have to be tailored according to the needs of the different stakeholder groups. We also recognize that the process to develop guidelines will have to be as inclusive as possible, and they should have a strong country focus. I would therefore like to encourage development partners and partner countries to propose effectiveness champions, champions whose experience can help us in developing the planned guidelines. Therefore, I also wish to repeat the main message of today again. International processes and conferences are important for mobilizing the political support and for bringing all stakeholders groups on board. But the implementation, we all know that, does not happen in meeting rooms in New York. The implementation has to happen on the ground in the partner countries. And that's also why we need to continue to bring the dialogue into the partner countries. We have to be helpful in facilitating dialogue on the partner country level. I would like to ask all of you, please join us with all your knowledge and with all your expertise. The Global Partnership has set up a knowledge sharing platform that will help us in the process. We are committed to a continued and inclusive dialogue that will allow everyone to share experiences of good practice stories and then provide input for the development of guidelines on the Kampala principles. We believe that we will only be successful if we manage to bring everyone on the table, and we will do our best to do so. Finally, I wish to thank the Fourth Sector Group and the Ford Foundation for hosting us here today. Thank you all once more for being here with us, and we hope to engage with as many of you in the future. Thank you very much.
Conference rooms in New York, but each of us has a responsibility to propel and accelerate the great advances of the 21st century. And one of the greatest advances of the 21st century are the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, and how each of us can change the course of history can take place here in this room, and this message can go forth from this room. So thank you very much to my fellow panelists, my esteemed colleagues and members of the audience, and of course to the OECD and the UNDP and the Ford Foundation for hosting this momentous event. Thank you.